everybody knows who the Kennedys are. And, working there was a special experience because I got to see firsthand what a congressional office looks like and how it operates. And, his father was Robert F. Kennedy and his uncle was John Kennedy. And like everywhere you go, there's memorabilia from the family history. And it was sort of like a dream come true to get to do this. And this one day, these guys caught me and like literally tossed me out of the building. And I'm in the pouring rain and I'm in, like, getting soaked in my one freaking suit. I'm like, if I was ever going to quit, it was going to be that day because I'm like, this is just freaking hard, man. I'm getting thrown out in the rain and my one suit's soaked. I got to have it dry clean now for tomorrow. And if I was ever going to quit, it was probably going to be that day. And it would have been very telling because that would have been the end of my sales career because it was really early. And I didn't. And I got up and I went home, got cleaned up, and I went back the next day and the next day and the next day. And then like a couple months later, I made the largest sale I ever made at the company. It was one of the largest in the entire region. And when I went to meet with Ross, I was like, how much money am I going to make? He's like, I don't know. I haven't written the comp plan yet. I'm like, okay. How many people we got to hire? A lot. Like, do we have any people so far? Yeah, we have a couple, but they stink and we're probably going to have to fire them and start over. I'm like, so you don't know how much money I'm going to make. You don't have a comp plan. We're going to have to fire everybody that you've hired already and restart. Why the hell would I want to do this job? And he's like, because we're the smartest two people in the room because we know what to do and they don't. And we can just build a business from scratch here however we want. And I'm like, that's the plan? He's like, that's the plan. I have founders that have sold their house to fund their company. I have two founders that have sold their house to fund their company. Those are the types of things that when you don't know what you're looking for till you see it, but when you see it, you know it. I had one of my founders that when he told me the story about him selling his house to fund his company, I was like, okay, stop talking, shut up. I'm in and I'm going to help you.
Today's guest is an entrepreneur. He's built lots of organizations from the inside out. He was most notably at Cox Communications, where he built as the director of sales. He helped the company go to about $43 million in revenue. Then he followed the CEO to Comcast, where he was responsible for a $550 million region. And he's also an angel investor, mentored lots of startups, but he got his career started in an eclectic way. He's working for Congressman Joe Kennedy in Washington, D.C., when he decided, I don't really want to do this. So when he decided to go to law school, got a sales job working with Herb Chambers. From there on, started his business career. He's had an excellent career. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about burning out. We'll talk about being an investor. We'll talk about now mentoring young people on their business careers. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the Builders and Funders Show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. I want to start with the very kind of beginning, the inception of your career, going into politics. Tell me
Okay.
about working for Joe Kennedy. What was that like?
It was awesome. I got introduced to Joe through my father, who had actually worked for John Kennedy, probably President John Kennedy, when he was a state senator, when he was a senator in Massachusetts. So had been involved and worked with Ted Kennedy because my dad was a principal and he was an advocate for education and for education bills. So he worked a lot with Senator Markey, Senator Kennedy, and Joe Kennedy's office. And when I was a junior at UMass Amherst, I was majoring in political science. And, typically what you do is you do an internship. And I'm like, well, where am I going to intern? Why don't I intern for, I don't know, maybe I could intern for a congressman or something. And my father said to me, I know people at Congressman Joe Kennedy's office. Why don't I see if I can get you an interview? And I'm like, sure, why not? And so that's how I got introduced to the congressman. And it was an unpaid internship. So I worked, it was full time too. I worked like 40 hours a week for no pay, but it was a chance to work for, at that time, one of the most influential congressmen um, in the state. And more importantly, work for one of the most iconic families in the world. Like everybody knows who the Kennedys are. And, working there was a special experience because I got to see firsthand what a congressional office looks like and how it operates. And I also got to see a little bit inside Camelot because, his father was Robert F. Kennedy and his uncle was John Kennedy. And like everywhere you go, there's memorabilia from the family history. And it was sort of like a dream come true to get to do this. And I had a really good time and it gave me clarity. It gave me clarity in a lot of things, one of which was, wow, these people work incredibly hard and make very little money outside of being like the congressman. Everyone that works in the office works like a dog and doesn't make a lot of money. So it gave me some clarity that when I graduated, I probably wasn't moving to Washington, D.C. and working on the Hill, which is what I thought I was going to do. I was going to do other things. So,
Interesting. Can we tell the story of, I think it was Jim Walsh, his chief of staff, and
Yeah.
how you noticed how a lot of DC, Washington D.C. staff, they weren't the congressmen themselves or independently wealthy, like they were working as like bartenders at night. I think that'd be a fun story to go into.
Jimmy was chief of staff for Joe, and so he ran the show. Everyone in the bar, and every congressman and senator has two offices. They have an office in their home state. So in this case, it was in Charlestown, Mass, which is Boston, which is where he's from, and his district. And then they have another office actually in Washington at the Capitol. So I worked in the Boston office, and Jimmy was his chief of staff and knew Joe for a long time. So he ran both the offices and was sort of the go-to guy for everything. If you've ever watched The West Wing, the famous TV show, Leo McGarry was President Bartlett's chief of staff. That was Jim Walsh. That's what he did. And so he coordinated everything, hired everybody, made sure the trains ran on time. But the funny thing was, and he was there 7 in the morning till 6, 7 at night, had a wife, a couple kids. And one night I was like, what's up for the evening? He's like, oh, I gotta go to my other job. And I'm like, what other job? You're chief of staff for U.S. Congressman. He's like, yeah, I bartend like 3, 4 nights a week. I'm like, why? He's like, Steve, I don't know if you noticed, like people that work in the congressman's office don't have the congressman's money. Like we're not a rich family. There is no Camelot here. We all work for a living and we work really hard. And the only person that makes money is usually the congressmen or senators, and most of them have wealth outside of working for Congress. He's like, the rest of us, most of us have two jobs, some of us have three. And I'm like, this guy's the highest ranking person in the office, and he's got two jobs. If I started here as like a low level grunt, what the hell am I going to make for money? So it really made me reevaluate my decision
Interesting. And then one of the reasons I brought up your experience in politics was because you're doing it around my age, 18, 19 years old, and
there. Yeah.
you were taught a very important lesson about influence and power. I think you were sent to court on the behalf of the congressman, and you had to represent him, and that's where you really saw how those dynamics played out. Tell me about that story of being sent to court to represent Joe Kennedy.
Yeah, so what happens in a lot of cases when people feel like they're not being treated fairly, they'll reach out to their congressman or senator who is their representative to the government. And in this case, this constituent felt that he wasn't being treated fairly and had some issues with, medical coverage. He was disabled and had some issues with claims being processed and getting what he thought was a fair shake based on his disability. So he wrote to the congressman, and the gentleman that I worked for, Joe Riley, was like, "Look, I don't have time to do this. I want you to go represent the congressman at court today." I'm like, "Is the congressman going?" He's like, "No, you're going." I'm going. Like you, Burke. I'm like, I'm 18 years old. Like, what do you want me to do? He's like, you're going to represent our office there, and when they call on you, you're going to make sure. And I had the history of the case and all of this, so I'm like, okay. So I go to court in the city, and it was the guy, his lawyer, a judge, and me. There wasn't like it wasn't like a trial or anything. It was just a hearing. And they introduced everybody, and he's like, can you please state who you are? And I said, I'm Steve Walsh. I'm here to represent Congressman Joe Kennedy's office, and Mr. So and so is a constituent in our district, and we're generally concerned about the treatment he's getting, and here's why, and here's the congressman's position on why we'd love this case to be heard. And it ended up getting going in his favor, and they voted in his favor, and all of a sudden things just started happening, and the guy ended up writing an unbelievably gracious letter to the congressman thanking him for his help and his support, and it really just taught me a lesson about access, influence, and persuasion, and that those things matter in life, and your ability to influence decisions and influence people is an incredibly important skill to master at a very early age. And it really was a good lesson for me to see firsthand, because they didn't care that I was there, but I was representing the congressman, and that carried a lot of weight.
I think one of the ways you use that later in your life was, I think, when you were interviewing at Comcast and you're going to be their VP, you said one of the most iconic lines I've heard. I've forgotten more than you guys know. Tell me about that story. How did you, putting that lesson to use later in your life? Tell me about those stories.
So I was, as you mentioned in the intro, I had worked at Cox Communications about 7 years. I was director of sales and helped them. I was a really early employee and helped them launch a couple markets in the B2B space. And then the president of Cox left and became the president of Comcast business. And I was one of his people and asked if I wanted to come do it at a company 4 times the size with unlimited capital. And Comcast was really late to the game to get into this space. And because Cox already had a 7 year head start. So I would be one of the first employees in the group, like one of the first three employees. I was going to be a vice president there. And they had a lot of internal employees that had been at Comcast a while who were interviewing for this job, folks that were a lot more tenured there than me, had been with the company longer, might have been more mature. I didn't always have this hair, might have been older. So I interviewed with a bunch of senior vice presidents, including the president of the division. And, they were like, why should we hire you? We have all these great candidates internally, and you haven't worked at Comcast, even though you've worked at Cox and you know Bill and all this stuff. Why should we hire you? And I was like, because you guys have no clue what to do. Like I've forgotten more than you know about building a business services unit at a cable company. I just did it for 7 years, and that company is now going to do $1 billion in revenue this year in that business division. $1 billion. You're at zero. You have no customers, no revenue, no employees. I've forgotten more than you know about this, and that's why you should hire me. And then I ended up getting the gig and started there the following month.
That's fascinating. Let's go back to getting into sales. So you're saying, you know what? I don't want to be in Washington D.C. This is
Mm-hmm.
not my path. You decided to go into law school, but you're working sales jobs. You go to work for Herb Chambers, very successful businessman, and you were telling me about the story of how you're in Boston. It's a rainy day, and you're trying to sell from building to building, and you get thrown out in the rain. To tell me
Yep.
about that story, and then how that turned into one of your biggest victories.
So I was selling copy machines for Herb Chambers, who now is known as one of the best auto dealers in the country. He's got over 100 dealerships. He's a billionaire, but he started in the copier business. And so I worked for a company called A Copy, and my territory was downtown Boston and Cambridge. And it was a rainy day. And I was like 21, 22 years old, not much older than you. And I was one of those, like, I had one suit and four shirts and tie combos to go with it. So it looked like it was more than one suit, but I really only owned one suit. And I was cold calling, and in those days, you literally went floor to floor, door to door, and every door had a no soliciting sign. And we would be like, I'm not soliciting, I'm just dropping off information, trying to set up a meeting. And they'd have security in the buildings that would literally walk the floors to try to keep salespeople out. And they'd chase you through the building. You'd have to like jump into elevators and stairwells. It was nuts. And this one day, these guys caught me and like literally tossed me out of the building. And I'm in the pouring rain, and I'm like getting soaked in my one freaking suit. And I'm like, if I was ever going to quit, it was going to be that day, because I'm like, this is just freaking hard, man. I'm getting thrown out in the rain and my one suit's soaked. I got to have it dry clean now for tomorrow. And if I was ever going to quit, it was probably going to be that day. And it would have been very telling, because that would have been the end of my sales career, because it was really early. And I didn't. And I got up and I went home, got cleaned up, and I went back the next day and the next day and the next day. And then like a couple months later, I made the largest sale I ever made at the company. It was one of the largest in the entire region for that quarter. And I sold a regional bank some ridiculous amount of copiers, like 25 copy machines. It was, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I did that off of a cold call as well. I just happened to walk in on the purchasing agent one day and introduce myself. And he's like, oh, we're actually thinking of upgrading some of our equipment. Why don't you come in and sit down? And I ended up making the sale about a month later, and it was a massive sale. And it really propelled my sales career and gave me the confidence that I could do it. And there were a lot of learnings there. The biggest one for me, Burke, that I use every day with my early stage founders is, you're going to get knocked down a lot in business and in life. And it's not about getting knocked down. It's what you do when you get back up. First of all, you need to get up, and then it's about what you do next. And what have you learned from that experience? And how can you apply that learning to your life and to your business going forward? And that was really telling for me that day.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that lesson there because I think at the time you're 22 years old, you're being thrown in puddles. You're like going through that, Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith movie, where like,
Sure.
your wife's like everything's going wrong, and then you did, I think, to that time's money was about $30,000. Today, probably adjusted for inflation, that's like $100,000 you're making at 22 years old just off this one deal. I want to
Yeah.
emphasize that like you're often in life, seems like with you especially, and with a lot of people's other careers, the best things happen to them after their biggest losses. Like we'll talk about how Hands On Angels was founded really after a burnout at Comcast and how it was born out of despair. But just wanted to emphasize that lesson for everyone listening because I think it's one of the most valuable lessons out there for founders.
We learn more from our failures than we ever do from our successes. I have, at least in my life, and the biggest guidance I give my founders all the time is be comfortable with failing, and failing a lot, and failing fast, because that leads to your next success. And don't be afraid of failure. Run towards it. And if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. You're just not.
And then you mentioned you were, as you're working these sales jobs, you get recruited to join Cox Communications. The early days, now it does obviously $1 billion in revenue, but back then it's just starting up. It's scrappy. There's only a few salespeople and the CEO. And you're telling me the story of how you walk in to do the interview and guys like, no plan, nothing. We're probably gonna have to fire all our sales guys. Can you, I'd love to hear about that story.
Yeah, so my good friend Ross Nelson, who I had dinner with last week, he's actually retiring from the cable industry this year, so congratulations to him. He hired me there, and I knew Ross through his brother, who was a sales guy for me early in my career when I got into sales leadership. And I actually had a job offer from another company to go work as a director of sales, and it was a fully vetted position. I was stepping into a great team. It was well defined. And when I went to meet with Ross, I was like, how much money am I going to make? He's like, I don't know. I haven't written the comp plan yet. I'm like, okay. How many people we got to hire? A lot. Like, do we have any people so far? Yeah, we have a couple, but they stink, and we're probably going to have to fire them and start over. I'm like, so you don't know how much money I'm going to make. You don't have a comp plan. We're going to have to fire everybody that you've hired already and restart. um, why the hell would I want to do this job? And he's like, because we're the smartest two people in the room because we know what to do and they don't. And and we can just build a business from scratch here however we want. And I'm like, that's the plan. He's like, that's the plan. And I went home to my wife and she's like, so you're gonna take the other job that's like defined and like, easier. And I'm like, no, I think I'm gonna go work with Ross. This sounds really cool. It's he said it would be a lot of fun. And I just had a gut feeling that he would know how to figure it out, and so would I. And that putting our heads together, we could do some interesting things. And that really started my career in the cable industry 25 years ago. And it's been an awesome ride. Awesome. He's still one of my closest friends to this day. I talk to him constantly, and we got to celebrate with him and his wife last week. A little retirement dinner. He's going to go own the world now.
One of the reasons I wanted to interview Steve is because a lot of times people they talk about Steve Jobs, but they don't talk about the people that allowed Steve Jobs to become who he was. There were a lot of entrepreneurs within Apple. Johnny Ive is one of the best
Sure.
examples, designer behind Apple. He was one of the great minds at Apple that allowed it to become the organization it did. I want to focus on one of the stories you had from building Cox, which was the launch in Las Vegas. You're launching in Las Vegas and you realize things are way worse than you would imagine. So you shut down the entire operation. You take a bet with your intuition. Things ended up going well, but you kind of made a contrarian bet there. Tell the audience about that story and what happened there.
Sure. So I was brought to Vegas from my original role in New England to help them launch new products and specifically launch. They were getting into the voice space, actual telephony voice space, and they had done a training and they had trained everybody, a couple hundred sales, sales and operations and service people, and they had done a commercial launch, and it went awful. And there was I think it was 11 markets in the country, and Las Vegas was last in everything, last in sales, last in revenue, last in everything. And I had determined pretty early on it was because we didn't get buy-in from the salespeople. We didn't train them the right way. We didn't arm them for success. We didn't tell them the why we were doing what we were doing, the what's in it for them. I mean, I always say WIFM is a massive thing. What's in it for me? We didn't tell them what's in it for them. We didn't align compensation to drive behavior because comp drives behavior in a lot of cases. So I went to my boss and I said, we're going to shut it down. And he's like, we're going to do what? I said, we're going to shut it down. We're going to shut down the operation for the next 2 weeks and we're going to relaunch. We're going to retrain everybody. I'm going to bring in some experts from my last company that I worked with that can help me put the right training together for them they understand their why and what's in it for them. We're going to launch a new comp plan. We're going to launch new incentives that drive the right behavior because comp drives behavior. And we're going to take a hit. We're going to shut it down for half a month, but we're going to do it the right way and we're going to relaunch this. And we did. We pulled everybody out of the field for 2 weeks and did intensive training 5 days a week, multiple hours. We did ride alongs, we did one on one coaching, and we rebuilt the entire thing and relaunched it, including with a comp plan, incentives for customers, everything. And over the next year, we went from being last of 11 markets in the country to being the number one market in the country for telephony and winning the Outstanding Achievement Award for the country. We're recognized as the top region in the country for it for the year. But sometimes you have to, the lesson there, Burke, is sometimes you have to take a step back to take a step forward. And so that was a big learning for me. And again, massive failure and then massive success. but I wouldn't have the success without learning from the failure.
That's fascinating. And I guess one of the big lessons for startups there is on like knowing how to make the right decisions and understanding that you can't ever compromise on quality. You have to maintain that kind of standard. And when I asked you during the prep call about what kept you going through all this, like you're being thrown in puddles and then you're being forced to make the really difficult decisions. You keep going up against these big obstacles that you don't necessarily have the answers on how to get through. And I want to really point out your answer. You talked about how there are people that believe in you, like whether it's your parents, your friends. There's always someone that believes in you, and you never want to let them down. Love to hear more about that perspective, because I'm sure there's founders out there right now that are going through something similar. Maybe they're in that valley of despair and whatever it might be, and they're being thrown in their puddles, metaphorically, maybe literally.
Sure.
What would you tell them? How can they get through it?
I just asked, what's the alternative? Like, what are you going to do? Put your tail between your legs and go home? Like, what's the alternative? Like, for me, at the time I was married. So I had a wife. We didn't have any kids yet, but I had a wife. We wanted to have a family. I had parents that had sacrificed a lot to get me here. My father was a principal. My mom was a secretary. They worked really hard to send my brother and I to some of the best schools in the country and college, and didn't have a lot of money to pay for it. So they had made a massive investment in us. So I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want to let my wife down, my brother. I didn't want to let myself down. And if the worst thing that happens is I fail at something, if that's the worst thing that happens, so what? Like, I'll just go get another job, or I'll figure something out. And you fake it till you make it. You try until you try new things. You're willing to fail. I don't know. I just had that attitude of, I'll figure it out. I'm a smart guy. I've got a great education. I'll figure it out. And I'm a learner. I like to learn new things and try new things. And I'm not afraid. I don't have this. I have a bigger fear of failure than I do of anything else. Like I'm like, I don't want to fail. Nobody wants to fail, but the alternative is not trying. So I'm not going to try anymore because I'm afraid of failing. Screw that. Let's just go and learn how to plow through that. And I think those early days, whether it was getting thrown in a puddle or the relaunch of Voice or any of those early experiences, really set the tone for me of just run towards failure. Just try everything until something works. Throw a bunch of stuff against the wall till you figure out what works. Then if you figure out something that works, double down on that and do it again and again and again. Your podcast, a great example. I guarantee, which episode am I? How many of these have you done?
It's going to be about 47, episode 47 with this.
So go back and watch the first episode you ever did. I guarantee it wasn't as tight as it is today. It wasn't, because you just weren't as good at it. You'd never done it before. But that's okay. I'm sure episode 55 will be better than episode 47 with me. And I guarantee you go back and watch that first episode. Like, my God, it was awful. I didn't know what I was doing. And so you didn't quit. You figured it out. You did it again and again. And sooner or later, you figured it out. And now you know what you're doing. I just think that life is a bunch of that. You have to figure out stuff that works and do more of that and get rid of the stuff that doesn't.
Fascinating. I think another lesson I picked up on with Cox Communications specifically is you guys built it from zero to now it's at $1 billion in revenue. Another thing that we talked about is timing. You guys got the timing right. You're at the right place
Yeah.
at the right time with the right people. Tell me about, if you're a founder today, like there have been times where I was too early to the party, sometimes too late. We tried
Sure.
building in crypto with a couple friends. We tried building when GPT-2, I think, first came out. We were like 13 or 14 trying to build a fitness AI assistant. And I think we were way too early. And now there
Sure.
are companies doing millions of dollars. But I want to talk a little bit about timing and how you can, as a founder, one, know if you've gotten the timing right, and maybe see, kind of see if you, I'd love to talk about that lesson around timing.
I think in order to get the timing right, you have to try a lot of things. You just do. I've been right and wrong on timing. I get into, use a great example. You just mentioned crypto. So I'm a big layer one guy, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, predominantly Bitcoin. I've been in Bitcoin about 7 years. Now, a lot of people will say, wow, that's a long time. But when I got in 2018, 17, 18, didn't feel long. It felt like I was really late to the party because I was buying at 8,000 and 10,000 and $15,000. And I'm like, wow, I'm so late, because friends of mine were in it since like 2012 or 13, and they were buying at couple of $100. I have one friend that bought his first Bitcoin at $8. $8 a coin. He was a Mount Gox guy way back. So I was like, I'm late. Well, let's check, because I look at it every morning when I go to the gym. Bitcoin right now, it's trading at $92,000. Was 100,000 2 weeks ago. Am I late? Am I early? It's actually an opinion. I don't know. I still think I'm early at $100,000 a coin. If it's like, so you're at 100,000, you're going to stop buying. I'm like, no, I buy it every Friday. Why? I just have this thesis that I think I've got alpha with this. I think I've recognized that there's a long-term play here. The dollar gets debased so much every year that what the hell else am I going to buy? So I just stay in it. But I think there's learnings there. I just do. There is, Facebook wasn't the first social media platform. It was like the seventh, but they just did it better and their timing was better. Everybody told Jeff Bezos you can't sell books on the internet. He's like, really? Let me show you. So I just think sometimes you have to take a lot of swings at the plate sometimes to get the timing right. I've got 66 portfolio companies. 9 have exited, which is great, but 5 or 6 have gone out of business. And it wasn't because they were bad founders. It's just they might have had bad timing, one of which was in the crypto space. And when the market went to hell a couple years ago, they couldn't raise their next round and the timing was off. And that just happens. Doesn't mean the founders were bad. I still talk to them constantly. But timing has a lot to do with it. But you gotta, in order to have good or bad timing, you have to have swings at the plate. You have to step up to bat and try things. That's how you get your timing better, is you just see a lot of stuff. In investing now, I just see so many deals that my timing's getting better because I just see more things than I did 5 years ago.
Interesting. So it really is just about persevering. Just keep going, have that grit, and eventually you'll. That's I think that's a useful reminder for me, especially, and a lot of other younger founders out there. Because like, why can't I get this right? We keep trying, and we're either too late or and I guess lesson is just, dude, keep going. You're young,
Well,
and
you're also so early, Burke. Like, you're so early in your career, you have the benefit of time ahead of you. Dude, I became an entrepreneur for the first time at 46 years old. Try doing that. Wife, 2 kids, 2 houses. Like, that's hard. You're 18 years old. You got your whole life in front of you. Like, I'm assuming you're not married with 2 kids and mortgages and colleges. And so, I mean, you got a lot of runway in front of you. You should be looking at it going, wow, this is not easy, but I got so much time in front of me. I have the ability to fail because you have time on your side. I have to be a lot tighter with what I pick and how good I am at picking because I'll run out of time.
we talk about failure a lot. I want to talk about the third kind of big inflection point in your career, which
Sure.
was being burned out at Comcast. You're walking around, you've got an assistant everywhere. Your entire life is just run by this one assistant, and you just keep going meeting from meeting and meeting. And you at some point burn out and decide, you know what, I want to be an angel investor. And then you start, figuring out, just go into it as an amateur. I'd love to talk about that point in your life, that inflection point.
Yeah, I mean, I had no plan. I just got to the point where, you know, 200 people working for me. My assistant, who's still a good friend of mine to this day, would literally bebop me around from meeting to meeting, identify my 500 emails that came in and the 200 that had to be responded to that day. And it just became a grind. Like I say all the time, 3 of us, unlimited capital and no customers. It was a lot of fun. You know, 10,000 employees, 50,000 employees, 10 billion in revenue, not so much fun anymore. Just wasn't. And that's okay. Nothing's wrong with that, but I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I got plenty of opportunities to go do it again at other companies, and I turned them all down. And I just wanted my life to be the next phase of my life to be something different. And I felt I had something to offer. I was a long-term investor in public and private markets. Started to lean into alternatives like crypto, art, wine, and then I was like, well, I know how to build and scale businesses. I understand sales. I understand revenue, and I'm a pretty patient investor. Why don't I go help early stage founders? And I had absolutely no plan on how I was going to do that. I had no idea, but I was just going to try things. And everything was new for me, Burke. Everything you've learned in the last couple of years about podcasting and being a founder, I had to learn at 46 years old because I had never done it before. And I found that terrifying, exciting, energizing all at the same time. And I had no goddamn plan, none. And I just showed up at demo days one day and I was like, hey, I hear you're a founder and you're looking to raise money. I think I'm this thing called an angel investor. How can I help? That was it. That's how it all started. No
What were some
plan, though, zero.
what were some of those early investments you made or founders? What were some of those early learnings you made about being an angel investor?
Um, I had the good fortune of learning from some folks that had done it before at scale. There's a gentleman by the name of Jason Calacanis, who's probably one of the biggest angel investors of all time. He was one of the first checks into Uber. He's backed, I think, 7 or 8 unicorns at this point. He's done hundreds of investments. Jason runs a company called Launch in San Francisco. Um, I reached out to him very early on because I saw him on CNBC, and angel investing, this is like 7 years ago, was really starting to become a thing. And there was Jason, there was a guy named Gil Pacina, who was an alumni of UMass where I went, who ran Flight Venture Capital Firm. He was pretty famous in this space. And I just reached out to them and I was pretty um, candid, humble, and honest. I was like, hey, I'm a business guy. I've had a lot of success. I'm an investor, but I haven't invested in startups. Can you help me? Can you teach me? Can I learn? Can I draft off of you just to learn? And Jason was great. Jason was like, oh, I have this book called Angel. You can buy my book. I'm on CNBC. Here's my YouTube channel. And he just started sharing stuff with me. And I read everything he sent me, and I read the book, an audio book. And then I got to talk to Gil via email and asked him about his thesis around startups and placing bets. And I just started to make small bets into a diverse portfolio of companies and just learn. I read a lot. I read a lot of deal memos. And I joined Jason's syndicate and started doing co-investing with him where I could invest alongside him. And I just started to learn what good looked like. And then I went to pitch competitions and I just watched hundreds and hundreds of pitches, and you started to be able to develop pattern matching. And I'm like, oh, that's what a good founder looks like. Oh, that's what a good pitch looks like. That's the KPIs. And I just started to study and sort of create my own thesis. And that was really an important part of my learning. So I started to develop just patterns and place bets into companies. And the mistake a lot of investors make when they start this journey is they think they can pick a winner and they want to place big bets on very few companies. And the reality is you should be doing the opposite. You should be placing very small bets on a variety of companies so you can learn and mitigate the risk. So that's what I started doing. And the longer I did it, the better I got at picking. And I narrowed my thesis and my thesis became clearer. And then I started to still invest in a lot of companies, but increase my check size. And then I started to have some exits. So I was very fortunate, meaning companies either got acquired, went public, whatever. And I've had 9 of those now. And and now over the last 7 years, I've looked at 3,000 companies. I've invested in 66 of them. 9 have exited, 1 exited last week. And those 66 companies have raised over $1 billion, like 1.2 billion at this point, that I've been part of and helped a lot of them. And it's been a true blessing. But in the early days, I was really about being a sponge and learning from others. And I think, what you're doing is a great example. You ping me, you're like, hey, I'm doing this pod. I'm trying to help founders learn. I'm trying to learn myself. Will you be on and so to help me teach others? And I think that's a great skill to have. And it's something that's going to serve you really well in your life, honestly. And that's sort of what I did. I reached out to Jason and he's like, sure, man, here's all the stuff, learn. And it's been great. It's been a true blessing. And I think what I'm trying to do is pass that on to the next generation of folks like you that want to learn and grow. And I think that's the way the world should work.
How small were those early checks you were writing into these startups?
Couple $1,000, 2 grand, 3 grand, 5 grand. And now what's happened over time is it's grown to 25, 50,000 into a single company. My group, I do investing with a couple of close friends. We have something called a syndicate. We use special purpose vehicles to do it. We've done checks as big as 300,000 into rounds. So now we're doing deals. Every deal we'll do between 50,000 and 300,000 into an early stage company in a round. It's a lot of fun. And we're able to make a really big impact. Like, you got an early stage company that's raising, say, $1 million, and a group of hands-on people come along and say, here's 300 grand to get you started. Like, you can do a lot of damage with 300 grand. You really can. And we get to have an impact and help that founder. So It's very rewarding, but it's taken a long time to get here, man. It's taken 7 years and 3,000 conversations to get to this point, and I think a lot that gets lost on people. They think it's a very fast road, and it hasn't been. It's taken a lot of learning to get here.
You mentioned you've had over 3,000 conversations. You're reading every deal memo you can get your hands on, going through these pitches. I think one of the things that when I was studying Warren Buffett that stood out to me is that he's got this like mental filter. You know, he gets all this vast amounts of information. He can just filter it down to its essence. Be like, all right, this is how we're going to make these decisions. How do you, in within your mind, is there anything you do personally to kind of filter this information or manage that information coming in? Like, I'm sure you get overwhelmed, or a lot of investors that they're being bombarded with like pitches and deal memos and
Yeah.
all these conversations. How do you filter that in your head? How do you actually break it down to its essence and remember all that key information? Do you have some way of managing it and filtering in your head?
Um, I think the way I've managed it, I manage it differently today than I did years ago. The way I manage it today is in most cases, I won't do a deal if I can't have friends along for the ride. So when a founder approaches me, whether it's through my connections, maybe Techstars where I'm a mentor in residence, I'll be like, who else do you know in my network that you've talked to, that you've met with, that can validate you are who you say you are? Who else is going to tell me that Burke is who he says he is and does what he says he's going to do? So I try to connect the dots. And that gives me a great filter for, is this person going to do what they say they're going to do? Because the first thing, if you say to me, oh, Steve, here's 10 people in your network that I've met with that know me and are involved in Builders and Funders show. What do you think the first thing I'm going to do is? I'm going to ping them. I'm going to reach out to him on LinkedIn. I'm going to do that. I'm going to place a call and I'm going to go, hey, I met this dude, Burke. He's got this show called Founders, Builders, and Funders. What do you know about him? He's a good dude. Does he do what he says he can do? I'm going to learn so much that becomes an immediate filter for me. And if I can't find a bunch of people that are like over the moon, excited about you and what you do, then that's telling to me. So at least it doesn't mean I won't invest, but it gives my antennas up. So when I meet you, I'm asking myself, is this the type of person that's going to work hard? Is he going to do what he says he's going to do when he says he's going to do it? Is he going to surround himself with people that challenge him and challenge his thinking? Is he humble enough to do that? Because those are all traits you want in an early stage founder. So that's how I've sort of managed my signaling over time.
Fascinating. We talked a little bit about the patterns you're looking for, the humility, the hard work, etc. What are some other, especially like, you're like a self, kind of like you mentioned, you label yourself as like contrarian investor. What are some
Sure.
other maybe contrarian traits that you look at? Like we had Martin Tobias on the show. I think he's backed 6 or 7 unicorns, and he was talking about how he looks for second time founders, but their first venture, if it's failed, he will like them even more. So he looks for second time founders who've already had that one failure. What are some
Yeah.
other maybe lesser, not as obvious traits that you're looking for that make you go, you know what, this founder, they might be worth backing?
It's a good question. I look for founders that have had adversity, either in business or in life. And that adversity might look like something like maybe they came from a broken home. Maybe they're an immigrant. Maybe they're a first generation American. Maybe they put themselves through school. Maybe they had to join the army and go through the ROTC program to pay for school because their parents couldn't afford it. I think all of those are life lessons that can be applied to business, especially for early stage founders. So when you look at my portfolio, I don't want to say I back underrepresented founders, but there's a lot of founders in my portfolio. You go, oh, that's interesting. For example, 30% of my portfolio are founders that don't look like you and I. They don't. They could be immigrants, they could be women, they could be everything LGBTQ, everything under the sun. And it's not because I think that there's like this higher cause to back those founders. They just tend to win more. They have a willingness to win because in a lot of cases they have no plan B. I have founders in my portfolio that have moved their family from a foreign country to start their company. I have founders that have sold their house to fund their company. I have two founders that have sold their house to fund their company. Those are the types of things that when you don't know what you're looking for till you see it. But when you see it, you know it. I have one of my founders that when he told me the story about him selling his house to fund his company, I was like, okay, stop talking, shut up. I'm in and I'm going to help you. He's like, well, let me tell you some more stuff about the company. I said I'm in. Like, shut up. stop talking. I'm going to invest and I'm going to help you go find a couple $1,000,000. Because I'm like, anyone that's willing to do that has no plan B. And I get that. And I also love this company and his product and everything. But um, those are the types of traits. And also, uh, you have to be able to figure out, is this founder going to quit? Because most of the founders that don't make it don't fail because they run out of money. They fail because they quit. They just get tired. And you have to be able to have signaling for that. Is this founder going to persevere? So I look for that.
Interesting. So it's preferable if they've been through any kind of adversity in their life and it's shaped who they are. That's always gonna, or if they're underrepresented, like you said, they kind of got that chip on their shoulder, like they have to prove the world wrong, and it seems like over and over again. So if you're a founder, like there's a podcast called How to Take Over the World, and it's a bit of an interesting name, but Ben Wilson had an episode. He's the gentleman that hosts the show. He had an episode on the Wright brothers, and he's talking about how he was at some seminar and they're talking about, they've got this panel, and he says, I'm sitting around this panel and everyone's talking about mistakes they've learned from early in their lives. And people are talking how their dads were alcoholics and beat them and how they came from broken homes. And he sits there and says, am I just a failure? Like, I don't have any of this stuff. And these guys are doing billions of dollars or millions of dollars in revenue. I have none of that. Maybe that's a disadvantage. The fact that I don't come from such a
I agree.
background. So if you're a young person listening, you're 18, 19, 20, 24, even 25, and you're thinking, well, Steve, I don't know if I went through any of that kind of thing. Like, I don't know if I've been through some adversity that I can tell people about that's really shaped me. Would you, before you start a company, go do something like I don't know, join the military, go hitchhike around the world or do something that's like going to give you that? Or do you think, how would you approach it as a young person today if you're going, I don't know, Steve, I don't know if I have
I
something like
think I think honestly, Burke, if you can't figure that out, you're not looking hard enough internally. I think that's a sign. Everyone's had adversity in their life. No one has a perfect life, and anybody that tells you that they do is full of shit. They just are. No one has a perfect life. My life's not perfect. I have so many challenges on a daily basis. I failed twice today at the gym. It's just, I think you have to really take a step back. It doesn't mean you don't have to have like lost a parent in an auto accident, but what adversity could be, not getting good grades in school. Adversity could be maybe you had a speech impediment as a child you had to get over. Adversity could be you didn't get the job you wanted or you weren't elected captain of the team. Adversity comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think it's what we learn from those times is what we're really talking about. So if you have someone in your circles that's like, I've never experienced any of this, they're so full of shit, it's not even funny. Because of course they have. No one has a perfect life. No one has everything that's gone their way. And if they don't, then that says something about their ability maybe to start a big entity. Like how if you don't have the self-awareness that you've had adversity in your life that you have to come through, how the hell, I mean, being a founder, talk about adversity, you deal with it every day. Every day. You hear so many no's, so many more than yeses if you're an early stage founder. If you can't figure out how you're overcoming adversity and your journey, that's going to be hard. That's just my opinion.
Fascinating. Last thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned the gym twice during this interview. I want to
Yeah.
ask you about that because it seems like it's a big part of your life. Actually, obviously keeping yourself active. There's a Y Combinator interview with Sam Altman that was filmed a while ago, but they're talking about how a lot of times people overemphasize intelligence, but they don't talk about how it's connected to your physical body. Tell me about how maybe that's played a role and maybe some other habits that keep you grounded on your day-to-day life, because you said you're failing a lot. What are some things you do to de-stress or take your mind off things or make sure you can keep your sanity?
I think for me, it does start with the gym, which I try to be in a minimum of 5 days a week. I've upped it to 6 days a week. And for me, it's not, first of all, everybody thinks the most important thing in life is wealth, and it's not. It's health. Like if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And I made a decision years ago to do the hardest thing I ever have to do first thing in the morning, which is go to the gym. And I'm angry when I'm in the gym. Like I don't want, and I'm a very social person, but like I've been going to the same gym for like, 10, 15 years. I couldn't tell you the names of any people in that gym. I got a hoodie on, my beats in, I'm sweating. I'm just like, it's like 6 a.m. I don't want to be here, but I know it's where I need to be because it gives me the mental clarity that it's the hardest thing I have to do for my day. So when I finish 2 hours later, I have the clarity that I can do anything for the day, personal, business, or otherwise, because I've done the hardest. The hardest thing's done. And I always feel awful going in, and I always feel tremendous coming out. And it just gives me the mental clarity to start my day on the right foot. And I realized years ago that if I wasn't the best person I could be from a health perspective, I couldn't be the best husband, father, founder, friend. I just couldn't. So I made a decision that being healthy or trying to be healthy is going to start my day a majority of the time. And it's been a journey, and it's something that never gets old, and I have to work at it every day, but it's something that really grounds me and allows me to do what I need to do, which requires a lot of energy. And I just think that by getting that start during the beginning of the day, meditating, yoga, exercise, lifting, cardio, it just grounds me in what I need to do for that day. And it's been a total game changer for me.
That's fascinating. Are there any other habits that you've got that have contributed to your success, would you say, over the years?
I can juggle a lot of things. I can have a lot of balls in the air. I can compartmentalize my life. And I think of everything as sprints. So when you're building a product, you do product sprints, which are very short windows where you build something and then try something. My whole day is broken up into 30-minute segments. Very rarely, like this podcast at 45 minutes is the longest meeting I'll do today. Every other meeting is 30 minutes. I just, I don't do anything over 30 minutes. I like to do sprints of 30 minutes where I can have really focused conversations with either partners, customers, potential customers. I like them to be focused and fast, and it allows me to get through so many things throughout the day. The other thing that I do, if you're an iPhone user, they have the notes section, the notes app on your iPhone. Um, I am a huge to do list. I have a notes to do list for the day, personal and business, and nothing stays on my to do list longer than 24 hours. And at the end of 24 hours, whatever I finished, I cross off, and whatever I haven't finished becomes the top item for the following day. So nothing on my to-do list ever goes beyond 24 hours without getting done. And if it's on there more than 24 hours, it's not worth me doing, and I cross it off. It allows me to be incredibly productive and get through hundreds of tasks for that week in a very easy to manage and just little anal retentive way, but it just makes me super productive. Those are probably the two things that I do really well.
Awesome. There we go, Steve. That's it for the questions I've got. Anything you'd like to add, or any lesson stories that you'd like to end off with?
I just, this has been great for me. And look, I have a 23-year-old son and a 17-year-old son. So you're right in the wheelhouse of where I spend a lot of my time. And I wish for them they would have, just the curiosity that you have around learning and just learning from others. And I think it's a really great skill, Burke, to learn at a very early age. And I don't think that gets done a lot nowadays by your generation. And I think, you're sort of this, I'll call it a unicorn, that I don't see it often. And I think that's a really good thing to do. And it's a really good way to be. And I think it's going to serve you really well in your business and personal life, being curious and just asking questions and asking good questions and just pulling at them a little bit and saying, let me go a little deeper there. Let me go a little deeper. I just think it's a really good skill to have. And I don't have any more stories other than just to say I really appreciate you reaching out and for doing this, because I do think that rising tides raise all ships, and that when we share information and we do it in the right way, everybody wins because everybody learns. So thank you.